You know the exact moment. A child stares at an open textbook for 20 minutes, erases a hole through the page, shoves the assignment away, and finally declares they hate math. When this happens, adults naturally look to the classroom for a culprit. We assume the child hit a wall with a strict teacher, a confusing curriculum, or a dense chapter on fractions. Yet educational research and classroom observations point in a completely different direction. Long before that child ever sat for a difficult exam, the roots of their anxiety were already taking hold at home. Math fear acts differently than a simple gap in knowledge, which you can fix with targeted practice. It operates as an emotional barrier. It dictates how confidently a student attempts a problem and how quickly they surrender when confused. And the source of that barrier is surprisingly close to home. Parents, entirely by accident, are projecting their own unresolved struggles with the subject directly onto their kids. The anxiety is passed down like an unintentional generational inheritance, leaving students convinced they are destined to fail before the school bell even rings. This transfer of anxiety rarely happens during intense arguments. It slips in quietly during casual, everyday moments at the kitchen table. Parents drop verbal seeds without thinking. They make offhand comments like, "Our family's just not made for numbers," or "Math was always my worst subject." Children absorb these attitudes early, internalizing the belief that math ability is a fixed trait. It illustrates the constraints of a fixed mindset, where a child begins to believe their capacity for math is something they are born with, rather than a skill they can build. When a child is struggling with a worksheet, a parent will often lean in and say, "I was bad at math too." They say this to be empathetic, to offer comfort. But for the child, this empathy functions as proof of a permanent family limitation. If an adult couldn't figure it out, the child feels less pressure to persist through the difficulty. What starts as a well-intentioned attempt to soothe a frustrated kid becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, giving the child permission to give up. The environment changes completely when casual conversation turns into an evening homework session. Suddenly, the stakes feel immediately higher. A child makes a mistake, and the parent reacts. It's usually quick: an audible sigh, an explanation repeated slightly louder, or a look of pure disbelief that the child got the answer wrong again. The child processes those micro-reactions and learns a very specific psychological lesson. Making a math mistake in front of mom or dad is socially and emotionally unsafe. To protect themselves from that emotional friction, the child's behavior shifts. They stop trying. They actively avoid difficult problems because getting it wrong out loud hurts more than leaving the page blank. Adults frequently misinterpret this avoidance as laziness. In reality, the child is prioritizing emotional safety over the risk of failure. The fear of triggering a parent's frustration grows into an obstacle far more paralyzing than the actual difficulty of the math problem itself. Breaking this cycle requires a deliberate adjustment at home. Parents have to consciously separate their own past anxiety with the subject from their child's current academic journey. The first step is changing how we converse at the table. Instead of checking if the final answer is right, a parent can ask the child to explain their logic and walk through the problem. By celebrating the attempt itself, the child's brain begins to rewire. They start to view math as a process built through effort, which helps dismantle the fixed mindset. But if the emotional friction at the table starts to boil over, there is an ultimate protective strategy. The parent has to give themselves permission to step back from the homework entirely. This flowchart maps out a way to break the tension. By utilizing external, independent resources, like a structured practice platform or a teacher, parents can completely remove the heavy pressure of their own expectations from the room. Taking the parent out of the immediate equation creates a safe environment. The child can work through their confusion independently, making mistakes at their own pace without the looming threat of a frustrated reaction. Removing the fear of failure from the home environment transforms the subject. Math stops being an inherited limitation and becomes a puzzle that simply requires consistent practice.